Hey everybody, it's Tommy Canale and welcome to Before the Lights podcast, the show to find out how those in sports, music, and entertainment made their mark. Let's get this show started. Joining me today is a keynote and motivational speaker, a best-selling co-author with John Gordon of The Coffee Bean, a simple lesson to create positive change. He's a college professor of criminal justice at the University of Houston, a former Division I college quarterback that was sentenced to life at a Texas maximum security prison. He was a natural-born leader, an athlete with good looks and charm that at one time was a junkie, and then in 2017 received the Service to Mankind Award. Please welcome to the show, Damon West. Damon, my man, how are you today?
Tommy, I'm great, man. Thanks for having me on. I'm so glad we finally got to make this happen. I mean, I was in Vegas. We were this close to getting this done when I was in Vegas, going to speak to the New Mexico football team in Vegas, which is in the whole world's upside down. New Mexico's playing in Vegas. I mean, so yeah, but it's great to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy to connect. And thanks again to Bob Delaney. He's been connecting me up with some fabulous guests, and you're one of them. Damon, I want to start here with my guests based off the intro, so they kind of get an idea of how long everything's been happening. How long have you been clean?
July 30th, 2008. So a little over 12 years. The date's kind of etched into my mind because a SWAT team actually brought me into sobriety at gunpoint. So it was a very traumatic, one of those dates you won't ever forget. But yeah, so July 30th, 2008, the day I was arrested by the Dallas SWAT team, or as I tell audiences all over the country, that wasn't just the day I was arrested, that was the day I was rescued, you know? So that was a day I got into a new life.
Congratulations on being clean for this long. That's fantastic. Let's go back to Damon West as a youth. What kind of athlete were you as a child?
Oh, it's interesting. My father was a sports writer growing up. He's still alive. He was a sports writer for 50 years. So, I had access to all things sports. And he was one of those sports writers that got access to everywhere, in all these different places. He was the first sports writer to put black athletes on the front page of a sports page back in this part of Texas. 1971 was the first time. There's a guy named Joe Washington, actually was a running back here in Port Arthur, went on to play for Oklahoma Sooners, Washington Redskins. So, but my dad had us around the world of sports, my older brother, my younger brother, and I. My dad's a golfer. That was really his big thing. And he put golf clubs in our hands probably from the age 3 on. He had clubs cut for us. And he always told us that playing golf was such an important sport. A lot of business is done on the golf courses. He wanted us to know how to play golf. And it's the only sport you can really play all your life. But I never really was just fascinated with golf. I really liked baseball growing up, but I wasn't really that good at it until I was 11 years old. And this coach named John Bass got a hold of me. And I just saw John Bass. It's ironic we're talking about that. I saw him for the first time in a decade or two last weekend. And this coach saw something in me that no other coach had seen before or he knew how to look for, but he saw something in my talent. And he said, what he was telling me the other night, he's just like, hey, you had this raw athletic ability that if someone could just get in there and mold, and this guy did, then, there's no telling where I could go. And I went from being the second to the last guy picked in every sport to being the all-star, the top guy picked, star quarterback of my hometown, from playing baseball, I learned how to throw a football. I didn't know I could even throw a ball until this guy got a hold of me.
Before we go into your high school days and what you did at Thomas Jefferson High School, unfortunately, we had a bad situation happen at age 9. You had some childhood sexual abuse that really kind of actually changed your path. And talk about, that traumatic event and how it changed your course.
Yeah, and when I talk about the sexual abuse stuff, it was a female babysitter, and I was 9 when it happened. And what this did, how it changed me, because everybody's affected in a different way about when they go through something like that. But how it affected me was that it opened me up to a lot of adult behaviors, and all of a sudden, this Pandora's box of adult behaviors is open to me, and that's why whenever I'm 10, I started getting into drinking beer and smoking my mom's cigarettes. And I was stealing my mom's cigarettes. And by the time I'm 12, I'm smoking pot. I'm pushing the envelope on behaviors at a very young age because what normal 9 and 10-year-olds are doing doesn't interest me anymore. Going to a high school, going to a junior high dance and and maybe holding hands with some girl or maybe kissing her on the cheek. It's not interesting to a 9-year-old that's been through a sexual experience like that and liked it. It introduced me to a different world. And that's what I tell people all the time. It's not, the molestation thing, it affected me in a negative way, but not the negative way you would think. It's the negative sense that it introduced me to a world of behaviors that I had an appetite for at a very young age. And that's not normal. It's not a good appetite to have really at any age like that. But I mean, I got into this other side. It's like going through a door, and on the other side of that door, there's all these other doors that are flung open. But you're not supposed to go through those doors until you're, in your later teens or something like that, or early 20s. But there I am on the other side of the door, and I'm the only person my size on the other side of the door, but I've got access to all these other doors. And that's what I did. I just started going through doors in life. Maybe that's the best way to explain it.
No, it makes complete sense. How much did that affect you then in high school as an athlete and being the all-star star quarterback for Thomas Jefferson High School? And if you would, Damon, also kind of educate my listeners on what Friday Night Lights is all about in Texas.
Yeah, Texas football, when I talk over the country and talk to them about playing quarterback in Texas in my hometown, being a 3-year starting quarterback on a 5A football team in Texas, that's like, being the 3-year starter on a college Division I team. Football in Texas is a religion, Tommy. Mm-hmm. I mean, and people go to worship every Friday night.
Yes, they do.
In Texas at those stadiums, which are like cathedrals. And, when you're playing Texas high school football, there's a couple of things you can count on. One, you can count on getting a lot of breaks cut to you in life. If you're the guy, if you're the star of the team, you're the one that's the kind of, what somebody feels like the quarterback, that your wins and losses are tied to this guy. So I had a lot of rope basically to run around with in high school. I was a 3-year starting quarterback. I was really good. I was a phenomenal high school grade quarterback, but I had a lot of character issues. I got into trouble. But because of who I was, and frankly, honestly, because of who my dad was. My dad was a big sports writer in town, and his name carried a lot of weight, and I could drop his name, and I would shamelessly do it. I'd get in trouble with the cops and drop my dad's name. Of course, they know who my dad is. Most of them had heard of me, and it's always well, get home before I call your father. That's small town Texas growing up. But it didn't serve well to really instill any lessons in me. I mean, I really came out of that experience feeling like, hey, as long as I can play football, then I can go ahead and push the envelope. I can break rules if I want to. And I was that guy. I mean, I pulled no punches. And in my book, The Change Agent, I give it to myself with both barrels in there because I was really a cocky, arrogant little punk,
If you want to learn more about Friday Night Lights and Texas football, go back through my episodes. I've interviewed Coach Randy Allen, who's the head coach at Highland Park in Dallas, Texas, and we go all into that. But we're going to go forward here with Damon. You talked about your father. He's been great friends with Jimmy Johnson, and talk about being on the sidelines with the Dallas Cowboys and actually being in the locker room before they were going to go to their Super Bowl.
Oh, it was amazing. My dad and Jimmy being really good friends, and, Jimmy every summer would let me bring a couple of my receivers with me to training camp. They were going to be in Austin. And, I mean, we get to work out on the field where the Cowboys were working out with Aikman and Irvin and Harper, those guys after practice. And so I had access to that world with Jimmy and the Cowboys. And I'd play my game on Friday night in high school. And on Saturday, my dad and I would travel wherever the Cowboys are playing. And Sunday morning, Sunday evening, I'm on the sideline holding Jimmy's headphone cord in an NFL football game. And, I mean, what kid gets to do that? But it was actually this world. And I'm telling you, Tommy, getting to see the game up close and personal like that. I mean, high school speed is not that fast. College speed speeds up the game a little bit, depending on what division you go to too. When you're playing Division I and everybody's at speed, but pro, man, I'd go from playing a high school game on Friday to watching these guys fly around on Sunday. I mean, there's 300-pound guys running 4.7s out there. I mean, it was fast. I learned a lot. I tell you what I also learned from Jimmy is Jimmy didn't interfere with his coach's coaching. He let those guys coach and call their plays. From time to time, he would step in a 4th down type play and make a call. I think one of the real famous ones was whenever they were in the NFC Championship game against San Francisco. It was a 4th down, and they went for it and actually won that game 30-20. So Jimmy stepped in that play. I mean, I'm sitting there on the sideline, and he steps in and says, "Hey, no, let's run this play." So the guy led his coach's coach. He had tremendous confidence in the people around him. Obviously, if you're a Dallas fan, you don't see a lot of that going on anymore. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say that, but it was a great time to be around the Cowboys back then.
You end up at North Texas. What was your college recruitment like, and why did you choose North Texas?
This is a really interesting story. My college recruiting at first was really good because what we did, my father, understanding the sports world, especially the college football world, my dad was an AP voter in college football, college basketball. So he's real connected to the college world. So he's about 6'3". My older brother's 6'3". My mom's 5'7", I think. And my little brother is growing, and I'm 5'10", but we think that, hey, there's going to be a growth spurt at some point. So we put out this highlight film. I had a tremendous junior year in high school. We put out a highlight film. And on the highlight film, we put in there that I was 6'1", 6'2". This is where I think I'd like to be, But so the people that build this highlight film, I got handwritten letters from Steve Spurrier. The recruiting that went on for me going into my senior year, it was, Florida, Florida State, Miami, Florida, UCLA, Georgia, all the great passing schools in America in the early 90s. These are the people recruiting me, calling my house all the time. But then going into my senior year, it's discovered that, hey, this guy's only like 5'10". And I don't remember who it was that found out. Maybe it was Terry Donahue at UCLA. Somebody found out that I was 5'10", and that was it, man. Tom, it all dried up. All these big schools, this is the early 90s, mid-90s. No one wanted a 5'10" quarterback back then. This is before Johnny Manziel and all these other, shorter guys got to come out there and show what they could do. Drew Brees, But it dried up for me, and I ended up with just real serious offers from Southwest Texas State University and University of North Texas. And I'm telling you, begrudgingly, I ended up signing with the University of North Texas. I'm now looking back on it, it's great. I'm so thankful for my experience at North Texas, but going into that, man, I had these dreams, these aspirations to play at one of these mega, D1 passing schools, and they all just dried up. But there was a coach there at North Texas that actually played in my hometown, a guy named Todd Dodge. And Todd Dodge is the father of 7-on-7. This guy is the one that really started in Texas back in the mid-90s. And Todd was a quarterback coach at North Texas at the time. And, of course, he came back home to Port Arthur and recruited me. But, I got to tell you something, it dried up on me. The recruiting was a very tough process, especially for a guy that, had all the ability to play, but just wasn't the prototypical height. It really used to piss me off, to be honest with you.
Before we go into what you did after college, your career was cut short by an injury versus Texas A&M. Were you at a point, Damon, where you just felt like, where do I turn next? Or what am I going to do? Or were you still feel like I could come back and play football again?
I just felt like I could come back and play football again after the A&M injury. And I did. I got myself back on the depth chart. I didn't rehab great, but I did it enough. And in the summer before the next season, that happened in September 21st, 96, when I got hurt against A&M. And in June of 97, I severed my Achilles tendon in half in an accident in the home. And after the Achilles tendon injury, that was it. There was no more dreams or aspirations of football. I was just done. And I pretty much gave up on life, got further into drug abuse at that time. It was a very dark time for me. I did not handle my adversity well at all back then. I was definitely not a coffee bean.
You end up working with a national fundraiser on a United States presidential campaign. You work with U.S. Congress. You train to be a stockbroker in Dallas, maybe work a little bit on Wall Street. Was life starting to seem like, hey, man, this is the gravy road for me?
Yeah, there's certain occupations that suited me better. That suit me better. I'm a very much an outgoing people person, and getting into presidential fundraising was a very good fit for me. Another one was being a broker, and I was starting to get really good at things like that. But the brokerage job, it was a very fast-paced job. I remember that I was having a hard time keeping up, and that's where some other serious problems set in. I was at that job when I was a broker that I was introduced to meth for the first time. by another broker. I mean, frankly, because he sees me sleeping at work, and that's one of those jobs. That's a job you just can't sleep. You can't be taking a nap while the market's running and you got people's money on the line. So he brought me down to his car in the parking garage, UBS, and gave me my first hit of meth. Now, honestly, it was the hit that I was chasing the rest of the time.
So were you hooked immediately?
Immediately hooked. And I tell audiences everywhere I go, especially young people, man, this stuff, I think we do a disservice to young people, Tommy, when we go in and talk about drugs and alcohol, and and teachers and parents say, if you ever drink or do drugs, I mean, like, your head's going to explode. But no, that's not what happens, and they do it. They drink, or they have a cigarette, they vape or whatever, and they're still fine. They don't see the effect that was promised to them. But I tell them that with meth, they can go ahead and count on the fact that there's a good chance that they'll be immediately hooked to that drug. It's scientific. I mean, it's made in a lab. It's made to get you hooked, and it does a good job of it. And I know I was. I smoked it one time, and I was instantly hooked like that, and I could not stop. But I'm also an addict. I'm built differently mentally. But yeah, that drug had me from the word go. I mean, that first hit cost me everything, because I tried to get it for the rest of the time.
You ended up losing everything as you were hooked on meth, and became known as the Uptown Burglar due to a number of break-ins that you did. How long did you, well, let me back up. When did you start robbing, and how long were you robbing before you got caught?
So I think I started breaking into, I lost my job at UBS in 2004. And I survived pretty much on whatever I had in savings and selling some dope here and there, selling some meth here and there. You mostly just sell at that level. You're selling the meth to pay for your own. It was 2005, I think Thanksgiving holiday, 2005, that I started committing my first, property crimes. I was breaking into storage units. It was during the Thanksgiving holiday. I remember doing that.
Okay.
And you found out that, that's an easy way to make a little bit of money to pay for your habit. And look, this is a period of time where I go from having an apartment to being kicked out of an apartment to being homeless, and to sleeping in buildings, sleeping in people's cars, living in dope houses with other dope fiends. And so it wasn't a big stretch to start committing crimes, because I'm around a bunch of that element. I tell people all the time that theft and meth go together like rats and trash. I mean, it's an axiom. You can take that to the bank. And so you become the company you keep. And, around the people I was hanging out with, theft was not a big deal. That was a daily occurrence. That was just, that's just any day that ends in Y. And I became the company I keep. Actually, I went from hanging with the bad crowd, Tommy, to becoming the bad crowd.
We talked at the beginning of the show, July 30th, 2008 was the day that you were actually rescued. But talk about that day, Damon, leading up to being arrested.
And so, 10 days before that, my partner in crime, this guy named Dustin, had been picked up by the Dallas Police Department. And he sent me a text the night of, and he had this stolen car, and he sent me a text, and he said something about removing his name from the lease. Well, I knew the lease he was talking about was this second apartment we had leased. And in that second apartment, we called it the safe house. It had everything in it. It had over $1 million worth of stolen stuff. I mean, because you've got this ring of meth addicts, about a dozen of us in the Uptown Burglaries, and we're breaking into houses at such a pace that we don't even get to move all the stuff. Because part of the problem, Tommy, is this, man, and this is a psychological thing, that you become, when you get into that world, I'll use I statements. When I was into that world, and I was, into the burglaries, and that became basically my life, I got addicted to the ritual of actually getting ready to break into that place. I got addicted to the actual, movements of breaking into people's houses. That became something that you get a rush off of. And so we're breaking into so many houses and stealing stuff out of it. We're storing it in this safe house, and we try to move whatever we can to get dope from. But we're meth addicts. We're so unorganized. It's a big group of people. Dustin sends me a text, and he says something about removing his name from the safe house, and I didn't know what it meant until later that night. I'm watching TV, or somebody tells me, put it on TV, and they're walking Dustin out of his apartment in handcuffs, and the it's saying across the screen that an arrest has been made in the Uptown Burglaries, and I'm like, oh my God. So that night, I went over to the guy that leased the apartment, who happened to be in the meth world, another meth addict too. And, he was sympathetic to the cause, and I brought him over some meth and another identity to switch over the name of the lease, because the lease was in Dustin's name for the second apartment. And I switched over the name of the lease into another identity because I knew that the cops would be coming with a warrant for Dustin on that second apartment. And I went and got a burner phone and everything, Tommy, and registered the burner phone to that lease. And I told him, I said, man, you need to get ready because that knock is coming at your door. And if you can hold firm, tell him that you had to swap the lease out because this guy defaulted, didn't pay his money, and somebody else wanted it real quickly. And let them call me and I'll take it from there. And Tommy, the next day, that burner phone rang. And that burner phone, I didn't give the number out to anybody. I mean, it was just, I bought it just for that reason, for that lease. Maybe it was the next day, the day after, that burner phone rang, and I knew who was on the other side of that burner phone. And I answered it in the name of the person that I opened up the new lease in. And the guy said he was from the fire department. He said he's there to check he's there to check the sprinklers and want to know if he could get in. And I'm like, nah, you can't get in. I think I told him I was traveling back to Minnesota to get the rest of my stuff to move back into the apartment. And we're going back and forth, man. We're jousting a little bit. He's telling me how he needs to get in. I'm telling him why you can't get in. Neither one of us is letting each other know that we know who's on the other end of this phone. He knows he's talking to Damon West, the other Uptown burglar. And I know I'm talking to the lead detective probably on my case. Neither one of us is letting by. And so I finally tell the guy, I'm trying to avoid a trace too. I'm like, look, hey, I'll be back in a week. You can look at the sprinklers then. I got to go by. And it didn't take a week. It didn't even take a week. Maybe it was 2 more days. And I'm sitting there on the couch smoking meth with Tex, this drug dealer of mine, on July 30th, 2008. And I'm telling Tex, the end is near, man. They got Dustin. They called the burner phone, and the window breaks, and tumbling across my living room floor is this little canister smoking on one side. And boom, the flashbang grenade goes off, and that's it. My world has changed. I tell people all the time, it wasn't just a change in my world. It saved a lot of victims that I could have created beyond, with the Uptown burglaries. I mean, no one else got broken into in the Uptown burglaries because they had their man. They had the guy that was the head of the ringleader of the crew, zip tied on the floor of that apartment.
Talk about the 10 months before your court trial, then what that was like for you.
Yeah. So, Dallas County Jail was a rude awakening to an idyllic life. Even my idyllic life, I'm saying, not that meth is idyllic, but I mean, I didn't spend a lot of time in and out of the system. I've been arrested a couple of times before that, but I'm not getting out this time. And I make I'm a stupid criminal. I'm a drug addict. The only thought I have going through my head for 10 months is getting out and getting high. I pray to God every night, Tommy, God, get me out of this one, man. And if you do, I'll be a normal guy again. I'll get a job and I'll just smoke meth on the weekends. I got this, God. That was my mindset. But that's the mind of an addict, because addicts, I've learned, have a three-part thought process. We have a thought, then we obsess over it, and then it becomes physical. We put in. So I sit around obsessing for 10 months, fantasizing about the day when I get out and make probation. I've never had a felony. I'll think, hey, you know what? If I get convicted, I'll get 10 years probation. But I'm this cocky, arrogant guy that's in Dallas County Jail, and I get on these jail phones, and I'm trying to have like a telethon to raise money for my bail. My bail starts off at $250,000. And I'm thinking, man, I got enough people in the streets that owe me money and stuff like that around stolen stuff and dope. I can raise that. And man, I got on the phone and I committed more crimes on the phone. I got on the phone calling people from the dope world, and I'm orchestrating. And it's all I'm doing is making their case for them and why this guy is the head of the whole thing, because I'm orchestrating all this stuff. I'm the dumbest criminal in the world, Tommy. And I mean, I remember one night in Dallas County Jail at nighttime, what they will do is they'll bring you indictments to sign off on. And one night I got hit with like 15 indictments in one night off of those jail conversations. My bond went from $250,000 to $1.4 million, because each one of those indictments had a bond attached to it. Stacked. 1.4 million, that's a no bond. And that's when I realized that this thing, I mean, the wheels are off, man. And I'm off the track. Man, I did not think it was going to be as bad as it ended up being. I talked to some guys in Dallas County Jail, and I ended up making friends with this one guy, Mr. Jackson, and he becomes a pivotal part of this story. But he's letting me know before I go to trial, dude, you're in trouble. They're about to make an example out of you. And here's the thing, though, Tommy, is this case was a very high-profile case. The Uptown Burglaries, you're talking about one of the nicest parts of Dallas. Even Highland Park, the nicest part of Dallas, was being burglarized in all these cases. And they've got a guy in custody that's a white guy. And typically these cases, you know, when they have a black man in custody, they're going to go for a life sentence, especially for the kind of people that were violated, people that were victimized in this. So, I mean, there were a lot of eyeballs in this case. And look, they came after me with guns blazing, and they made their case. The jury of my trial was there for 6 days. Tommy, 6 days is a long criminal trial in the state of Texas for crimes that were non-aggravated. No one was ever home during my crimes. I never saw my victims. My victims never saw me. So no one was physically hurt. Didn't matter. That jury listened to 6 days of testimony, overwhelming evidence of my guilt. And at the end of 6 days, they went to deliberate on my sentence for 10 minutes. 10 minutes, brother. I mean, I don't know how much Law and Order you watch, but if a jury's gone for 10 minutes, they smoked you. Mm-hmm. And I mean, if they were only gone for 10 minutes, it would have been sooner, but one of the jurors sent a note into the judge from the jury room, wanted to know if they could give me life without parole, Tommy. Life without parole. Man, for property crimes committed on meth when no one was home. And the judge laughed because I'm sure he thought, hey, that's great. But he said, no, you can't give him life without parole. You can give him life, but not life without parole. And so they did. They gave me a life sentence.
What went through your mind when you heard your mother gasp after the judge announced 65 years in prison?
Oh, man. My poor mom, my poor family, I put them through hell. And that's the thing about this, Tommy, is addiction. Everybody in this country is affected by addiction, Tommy. Whether you're the addict going through it, you're the family member going through hell because of the addict, like I do with my family, you're the victim. Let's say you're the victim of an addict commits a crime against you to fund their addiction. And I just certainly did that. Or let's just say you're the taxpayer paying into an overburdened criminal justice system that has no idea how to handle the disease of addiction. Addiction affects everybody in this country, but family members are probably the ones that are hit the hardest. My mom and my dad, they love me unconditionally. And so they're going to do whatever they have to do to help me, in life. But I could not have let them down more. All this promise in life and all the opportunities they helped me get into in life. And they're sitting there listening to a jury sentence me in 10 minutes to a life sentence. When I heard my mother gasp, that was even more piercing than the judge reading off the sentence.
You had an opportunity to see your parents one last time before they took you off to prison. What did they say to you?
My dad didn't say anything. My dad was pretty stoic. He was in stunned disbelief. He had just saw his son with all this promise in life, life sentence in prison. So my mom's a nurse. She's used to traumatic situations. So she did all the talking. And she told me, she said, baby, debts in life demand to be paid. And she said, you just got hit with one hell of a bill from the state of Texas. But she said, you did the things they said you did at that trial, Damon. So you have to go and pay that debt to society. She said, but you owe your father and I a debt too. She said, Damon, we gave you all the opportunity, love, and support to be anything you wanted to be in life. And this is how you repay us. She said, it's not going to work. She said, so here's the debt you're going to pay to us. When you go to prison, you will not get in one of these white hate groups, one of these Aryan Brotherhood type gangs, because you're scared because you're the minority in there. She said, it's not going to work. You were never raised to see race, and you're not going to start now. And she said, you will not get any tattoos while you're inside that prison. So my mom's giving me this message. She said, no gangs, no tattoos. She said, you come back as the man we raised, or don't come back at all. And excuse me, this is tough love coming from your mother. When she wasn't budging, she said, do you understand this debt you're going to pay? And I was like, in tears. I was like, yeah, I do, Mom. But Tommy, what do I know about prison? I'm a white middle-class guy in America. What do I know about the penitentiary, right? Mm-hmm. But I'd soon find out.
Damon, how'd you get off drugs, and what was the withdrawal like?
That's a very good question. It's a question that not enough people ask, because people assume that there's some kind of program once you get in there for it to come down, because all these people are coming off of different things. Some people are coming off of heroin. Some people are coming off of meth, Some people are coming off extreme alcohol. Look, they throw you in Dallas County Jail. You're just in there. There's no detox program. There were guys that would come in off of heroin, and they defecate all over themselves in the corner for a couple of days, and a couple of guys would throw them in the shower and wash them off. They'd vomit all over themselves. And there's no program to help you out with the come down. The come down, it's hard. It's a hard place to sober up. I remember for a while there, first couple of weeks, I'd wake up and eat or wake up and fight and go back to bed. I was exhausted. Coming off meth, it was like this extreme fatigue set in. And that fatigue stayed there for a long time. I felt my brain was probably hazy from the meth all the way until 2011. I mean, 3 years later, I don't feel like I was fully there mentally. It took a long time to recover from meth. I don't know what the long-term damage is that I did, Tommy, but there's got to be something in there.
I would agree. Damon, talk about becoming an inmate. And then what were your first few days like in prison?
Let me preface this by saying prison was the hardest, most dangerous, scariest thing I've ever been through in my life. I mean, I don't have anything even close to compare it to. The first day in prison, when I first walked in, I mean, you're immediately confronted by someone from your own race. This is the life sentence building, one of the worst parts of prison to go to. Somebody from my own race confronts me and wants to know what gang I'm going to be in, what family. They call gangs families, what family I'm going to be a part of. And, I was prepared for that because Mr. Jackson told me that was coming. And, I got him out of my face. I told him, I was riding with God. And the second guy that came up wasn't coming to talk, but I was, like I said, I was prepared for that. And so I'd say within 15 minutes, I'm in my first fight in prison with one of the biggest guys, a big skinhead, big Aryan Brotherhood guy, and he beats the living hell out of me. And that's just day one. I mean, and this was like being on Groundhog Day, just repeated every day. I mean, from Dallas County Jail to the penitentiary, and this would be the first 2 months of the penitentiary. From Dallas County Jail to the penitentiary, I probably got in 36 fights and I lost, physically lost 75% of those fights. I mean, 75. But, Jackson told me something in Dallas County Jail about fighting. He said, you're going to fight a lot when you get to prison. He said, but here's the what you need to understand about fighting is you don't have to win all your fights, but you do have to fight all your fights. And that's a tremendous lesson in life, Tommy, because, we sometimes get caught up in this idea that we're going to win. But the reality is you're not going to win all your fights. And losing is a part of life. But Jackson's telling me that with these losses come lessons, and you got to pick yourself up and get going again. You can't stay down.
Before we go into the conversation with Mr. Jackson, I want people to understand you're in a maximum security prison in Texas with no air conditioning, and Texas is known for its hot, humid summers. I mean, this is not what people may think. Oh, they got air conditioning and they're locked up. This was hardcore.
Yeah, no, look, there's no air conditioning in Texas prison, and I'm on the Gulf Coast of Texas. The humidity gets to be 100% here for a couple of months straight, and it's 100 degrees, 100% humidity. I mean, you're choking on the air, and that's a hard place to live in. And look, I mean, prison by design is a punishment, right? That's what prison is. It's penitence is at the root word of penitentiary. But look, man, air conditioning, that's an Eighth Amendment cruelty thing. It's so hard to live inside that prison. There are days now, Tommy, when I walk outside in the summertime from my nice house that I have with my family. I mean, not a big house, small house, but I mean, a nice, comfortable home. I walk outside and the heat hits me and I flash back to prison. And I immediately think about walking out of my cell or walking into my cell when that heat hit me like that. But now there's a difference between where I live and the heat from the outside. But living in Texas prison, there's no difference from the heat outside as heat inside. It's trapped heat. It's probably worse inside.
Visit my website, beforethelightspod.com, and click on the vegas.com banners to get your best deals for Las Vegas. For shows, hotels, vacation packages, go to beforethelightspod.com and click on the vegas.com banners. Damon, tell my audience about your conversation with Mr. Jackson.
So Mr. Jackson, he was a guy in Dallas County Jail, older black guy. I got everybody in the pod telling me I've got to get into a gang. Everybody, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, it's very, very universal, their message. Hey, you're going to the worst part of prison. This is going to be, something you can't survive without a gang. But Jackson was different. He was, like I said, probably in the 60s. He's a career criminal. Been in and out of prison all of his life. What's interesting about him, it's an interesting dichotomy of the man himself is that he could never get it together for himself, but yet he had this amazing message that ended up being the thing that allowed me to get it together. His message, even in his own life, he would never been able to do with it what I was able to do. And some of that's luck and a lot of help from other people. But Jackson was a real positive guy, and he had a smile on his face all the time. And he comes up to me one morning. He's telling me, he's like, look, all these idiots talk about you have to get into a gang. He's like, don't listen to them. But he said, let me tell you what prison's going to be like. And that's when he's telling me prison's all about race. He said, and when you go into prison, the white gangs get the first dibs on you. The Aryan Brotherhood, the Aryan Circle, the White Knights, the Woods. He's naming all the white prison gangs. He said, and after that, if you don't give in to their ideology, hate out of fear, then the black gangs are coming. The Crips and the Bloods, the Gangster Disciples, Mandingo Warriors. And so he's telling me about this world I'm going into, and he's seeing that there's a lot of, I'm not registering all of it because, I'm just the sheer terror. And that's when he backs it up a bit. He says, let me break it down for you another way. He said, I want you to imagine prison as a pot of boiling water. And he said, anything we put in that pot of boiling water will be changed by the heat and the pressure inside that pot. And he said, I'm going to put 3 things in that pot of boiling water and watch how they change: a carrot, an egg, and a coffee bean. And so he said, first things first, if I put a carrot in that pot of boiling water, what happens to the carrot? And I'm like, well, the carrot turns soft. And he said, that's right. The carrot goes into prison hard, but the water, the prison, changes that hard carrot, turns it soft. It beats it down, makes it soft and mushy and weak. And he said the carrot got beat, he got robbed, he got raped, and he may have gotten killed. He said, you don't want to be the carrot. He said, what about the egg, West? And I said, well, the egg turns hard, Mr. Jackson, like a hard-boiled egg. And he said, that's right. He said the egg has a shell that protects it physically, but inside that shell, that soft liquid core, his heart becomes hardened now. And he said, if your heart becomes hardened, well, now you're incapable of giving and receiving love. And he said, if you're incapable of giving and receiving love, you've become institutionalized, and you do not come back as someone your parents recognize, because your eggshell will have swastikas tattooed all over it. And that's when he asked, he said, what about the coffee bean? And I had no clue. I didn't know what happened to a coffee bean in a pot of boiling water. I've never heard of putting a coffee bean in boiling water. And that's when he told me probably the most important lesson of my life is that he said, if I put a coffee bean into that same pot of boiling water we call prison, he said, now you got to change the name of the water to coffee. Because he said the coffee bean, Wes, the smallest of these 3 things, he said, small like you, had the power to change the entire atmosphere inside that pot, because the power was inside the coffee bean, just like the power is inside of you. And he said everything else was changed by the water, but the coffee bean changed the water, transformed the water. And he said everybody in life puts out energy, negative or positive. Whatever kind of energy you put out, you attract back. It's called the law of attraction, and it works. So he said if you walk around prison all the time with a mean mug on your face and a frown, and you want to look hard, what you're going to actually do is attract the hardest people to you. He said it can be a very dangerous, even deadly endeavor where you're going. He said, but Wes, if you walk around that prison with a smile on your face and you let those guys know they're not getting to you, no matter what they do, they can't break you. He said, man, you change prison from the inside out. And now the other coffee beans in prison, the other positive inmates, they'll find you because of your energy. And the last thing this guy tells me before I go to prison to go serve my life sentence and get on that prison bus, he says, Wes, go out there and go be a coffee bean. Be a coffee bean, Tommy. 4 words.
What are the lessons then of the coffee bean?
First of all, to be a coffee bean, you've got to have a mindset of opportunity. And that was something I learned from another cellmate in there, that he assured me that becoming a coffee bean would never happen with the way I thought. I mean, because here I was in prison and I wanted to be this coffee bean, but I didn't have, a rules or how to do it or a roadmap or a guide. But he said, you're blocked off from all that because your thinking's bad. He said, you have stinking thinking. That's the only time I've ever heard stinking thinking. But he said, in order to change the way you act, to change the way you think, because all action is born of thought. He said, you have to quit looking at prison as a punishment and start looking at prison as an opportunity. Now, I begin every presentation I go into, especially in 2020, by saying, hey, look, I'm here to talk about finding the opportunities in adversity. Now, think about the adversity I'm faced with. I'm sitting in a maximum security prison, just began serving a life sentence. I'm living in a living nightmare Groundhog Day of hell where I go fight every day for my life. And this guy is telling me with a straight face, man, this is your opportunity in life. I mean, it stunned me. And his name was Carlos, my cellmate. I'm like, Carlos, man, how can you say this is an opportunity? He said, this is it, man. It's as good as it's going to get. You got 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to work on yourself. What are you prepared to do? And so I started getting up every day. My feet would hit the cold concrete floor of the prison cell, and And I'd say it out loud, Tommy. I'd say, hey, God, thanks for this opportunity. And I'd go work on myself. And I didn't believe it at first, but I kept doing it. And because I'm creating a good belief system, good habits. And days became weeks became months, and months became years. But I figured out how to become that coffee bean. And there were 5 ways that I would go about it every day. The first one is to have positive body language, smile. I'd maintain positive body language because when you smile, it releases endorphins, makes you feel good. There's something that you get out of smiling too. But it's what happens when other people see you smile, they smile back, and positive people are attracted to your smile. And that sets out a course of other positive smiling people in the area you live in. I did this in a maximum security prison, and the toughest part of the prison system, you've got people smiling all over the place now, but you're going to have negative people too. You're going to have truly negative, hardcore people, but in a room full of smiling, positive people, negative people usually get out of the room. They quit. They don't want to be a part of that. They quit their jobs or schools or teams, whatever. But positive energy is a good way to run negative people off. And that's okay too. You can't bring everybody along for the ride. Second way of being a coffee bean was working out on myself every day, spiritually, mentally, and physically. I was locked up with guys could have played in the NBA or the NFL, Tommy. These guys were physical specimens, but all they did was work out their bodies every day. They didn't work out their minds, and they didn't work out their soul. And if you want to be a coffee bean, you'd have to work out all 3. And so I had this ritual and still have to this day. I say the same prayer every day I've been saying since I got into recovery in prison. And my prayers are different today than they were in Dallas County Jail. Today, I ask for 2 things. That's it. I say, hey, God, put in front of me what you need me to do today for you, and let me recognize it when I see it. And that's it. That's the only thing I ask for, because I trust that if I take care of what God needs me to do for him, he'll take care of my needs too. And then my mental workout after that is every kind of book I read, what kind of videos do I watch, what kind of websites do I go to, my social media feed, the stuff I'm looking at on social media. What am I watching news-wise? Am I watching people screaming at each other? That's not really news. I got to turn that stuff off. So you are what you eat, Tommy. It's not just about food. It's about everything you put in this big brain of yours up there. So feed it the right stuff. And physically, you got to take care of yourself. You get one body in life. And so, you got to eat the right foods. You got to get enough rest. You got to try to take care of yourself physically. But it's a daily routine of spiritual, physical, and mental workout. The third rule about being a coffee bean was being a servant leader, because the secret to life is servant leadership. And servant leadership, it's helping other people achieve their goals in life, helping to raise other people up to a different station of life. When I was in prison, I couldn't take any college classes. I'd already had a bachelor's degree, but I could help other men learn how to read and write, get them ready for the GED test, find ways to help out. And I would insert myself into the lives of people that were trying to do better for themselves inside that prison and be a servant leader in there. I would try to find ways to help people that could do nothing at all for me. And that's what servant leadership is about. The most fundamental necessity to being a servant leader is humility. And humility is something I lacked in my previous life. Back when I was under the lights, the Friday night lights, the Saturday night lights of playing football, humility was something that was unachievable for me at that time. But, when you have all your ego removed, humility is attractive whenever you're inside of that maximum security prison. And it's something I hold on to today. The fourth rule about being a coffee bean is understanding what you do and not control. Control the controllables. And I found out there's only 4 things you control. The 4 things you control are what you think, what you say, what you feel, and most importantly, everybody's going to see what you do, your actions. What do you do? And everything you control, Tommy, appears to be in your ears, but between your ears, inside your head. And if it's not inside your head, you don't control it. It was like during the coronavirus, man. And the White House, the CDC, the World Health Organization, none of these people called Damon West to say, how do we fix this problem? Because I had all the answers, Tommy, and I waited for them to call. But I got to the point where I couldn't wait for them to call anymore, and I had to do something for myself and put positive energy out there, because I have bad days too. And waiting around to try to fix the coronavirus, I'm talking in jest, of course, because I'm not seriously waiting for them to call me. But you get frustrated with things that are going on in the world, but you have to take a step back and realize, hey, you know what? That's not even my thing to control. But how I respond to these things is what I control. And controlling my responses was something that prison was a great training ground for. And the fifth rule about being a coffee bean is just understanding that your past doesn't define you, because your past is your lesson. And it's a great thing you have, your past. You can learn from it and teach other people with it. The present, today, that's a gift. Not a gift for you, but a gift for you, what you can do for other people. How much can you pack into the stream of life today for humanity? And the future is your motivation. But I tell people all the time, Tommy, motivate yourself with the right things, because if you don't motivate yourself with the right things, then, well, I mean, you run the risk of becoming a prisoner in your mind. And the prison in your mind is the hardest prison to walk out of. And you can take that from the perspective of me living in prison for almost 10 years or me teaching college students about prisons in America. But the hardest place to do time in this country, the toughest prison in America, is the prison in your mind. I meet more people out here that are locked up than I ever did when I was in prison, because more people are in prison by their thoughts and by their things than by steel bars and barbed wire and concrete, Tommy.
The book is The Coffee Bean, a simple lesson to create positive change. I highly suggest you look it up and go get it. And also grab The Change Agent, how a former college quarterback sentenced to life in prison transformed his world. Couple more things, Damon. Paroled after 7.5 years. What was the feeling like when you got the word that you were getting out?
Oh man, I was shocked. I did not anticipate making parole. It was never something I thought was going to happen. Tommy, I thought I was going to do 10 or 15 years. That's what you usually do in a life sentence. And I was prepared to do that. I didn't want to do that, but I was prepared to do it. But the lady from parole, they came to visit me. She said, look, Mr. West, we don't see a lot of people come through parole like you. You had every opportunity, all these privileges in life. You blew through all of it. You became a drug addict and a thief and a criminal, made victims, and a jury gave you life in prison. But instead of letting that life sentence define you, she said, you came to prison and you changed yourself inside this prison. She said, matter of fact, to be honest, you changed prison around you. So she said, I have one question for you. If you could be remembered for being anything in this world, anything in this life, anything at all, she said, give it to me in just one word, go. And man, it's the easiest question for a coffee bean to answer, because a coffee bean, the answer is useful. Man, I just want to be useful. And I told her I could be useful in prison, or I can be useful out in the world finding those coffee beans. And she said, we're going to let you go. And I was floored. What was interesting too is getting ready to leave that place. It was very emotional, and I see the gate, and all I want to do is get out of prison. And coming down the sidewalk is this guy that was like a brother to me in prison, a guy named Sabor, black guy from Dallas, Muslim guy named Sabor. He's 45 years old, same age as me. We were cellmates for a time. Tremendous guy. In fact, I stay in touch with Sabor to this day. I put money on his books. I take his phone calls. But the guy was really like my brother. He comes up to me. He's very emotional. And he's like, hey, I'm so happy for you, Damon. You made parole. You're going to see your family again. He said, I got to ask you something, though. And I'm like, Sabor, what is it, man? Ask me whatever you want. He said, when you get out of prison, are you going to talk about what you saw in here, what we talked about in here? And Tommy, what Sabor wants to know, he wants to know if am I going to talk about, the stuff we talked about in 45 cell and racism, disparities in the system, social justice. He wants to know, am I going to touch on these topics where everybody can hear me? And I'm like, Sabor, man, you know me, I will. And what he told me, Tommy, became a call to action in my life, because his words hit me right between the eyes when he said, good. Sometimes they lock up the right guy. Sometimes they lock up the right guy. And that's why I go around the country and I talk about racism. And Jim Rome was really the podcast that I've been out talking about this for a couple of years, but Jim Rome had me on his podcast right after the George Floyd murder. And, I told Jim before the podcast, I want to talk about racism. He's like, well, what do you want to say? No white guy really wants to talk about that. What do you want to say? And so I told him, it's the stuff I'm about to go into now. And after that podcast hit, man, college athletic departments, the entire athletic, these colleges bring me in to talk about social justice and racism. A white guy, Tommy, to bring me in to talk about social justice, because I come from a different perspective. And one of the things I do is I lay out the fact that, definitions are important. Racism, when we're talking about racism, you have to define racism. And racism is about the imbalance of power. It means one side has more power than the other side, so much that you could write laws to affect where someone lives, how they live, what kind of schools they go to. And in America, Tommy, white people have that power. That's why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism, because white people, for the most part, have never experienced racism. And when a white person comes up to me, Tommy, and says, hey, Damon, that person of color was being racist towards me, I stop and I correct them, because it's helpful to correct other people and give them the right information. And I tell them, no, definitions, they're important. What you're talking about is prejudice, and prejudice means to prejudge. That's the root word of prejudice. And all races can be prejudiced against each other, Tommy. That's not exclusively white, but racism is an exclusively white thing. But I feel like I'm the right guy to talk about it, Tommy, because I've lived in a world before, in an environment where being white wasn't an advantage. I've lived in an environment where I couldn't sit on a certain row of benches in the day room because of the color of my skin, or I got my face kicked in because of the color of my skin. So I understand racism. And it's one of the things I want to do everywhere I go, that, that they're bringing me in for that is to talk about that. Because, I mean, look, Tommy, we live in the greatest country in the history of the world, but we can be so much better. We're leaving so much on the table in life, and we have. Every generation of Americans before us has never been able to attack this problem of racism in America. And to understand it, you have to understand, man, when you go into a prison, Tommy, you look at the population that looks back at you, half of the population is black men. Black men, Tommy, they only make up 6.5% of the population in this country. But 1 out of every 4 black men in this country is in the system. I mean, that's a staggering number. I mean, it's like, so to believe that that's what's going on, you have to think that 6.5% of the population commits 50% of the crime. And that's not true, Tommy. It's just not true. But it's because we have multiple criminal justice systems in this country. You got a black one, you've got a white one, you've got a brown one, you've got a rich one, you've got a poor one. Hell, you got one for cops, and it depends on who you are and where you fit on that spectrum is the kind of justice you can expect to receive in the United States of America. And so leaving prison, Sabor wants to know, am I going to take that message out there? And the answer is hell yes, I'm going to take that message out there because somebody needs to start these conversations, Tommy. But you know what's worse than anything? It's not talking about it's bad, but someone that comes in the room and talks about it and doesn't tell you how they think you should fix it. If you're going to tell me what's wrong with the situation or what's wrong with the country, then tell me what you think your solutions are. So that's what I'm going to do next. I'll tell you, Tommy, how I think we fix it. I think that white people that look like you, people that look like me, we need to get off the sideline and get in the game with the intent to win this thing, not run the clock out to the protest stop and the riots stop, but get next to our black and brown brothers and sisters out there and listen. That's the first thing we need to do. But there's 2 things that I've found that stop white people from getting involved in this stuff. One is they don't understand racism because they've never experienced it. And 2, you're scared to death, Tommy. Scared to death, I'll say the wrong thing and lose everything in the pride. This cancel culture, that's real stuff out there. And it's frightening. And the safest play for white people is to stay on the sideline and do nothing. And that's why I go into a room and I say, hey, that's what white people need to do. White people need to get in the game and start listening. But black people need to invite white people into these conversations with grace. And when you invite someone into a conversation with grace, Tommy, you're not allowing for a cancel culture to come in and wipe someone out. You're saying that, hey, you may not say or do the right thing, but I'm going to help you get there. I'm not going to let you get wiped out by a cancel culture because I'm going to help teach you and get you there because you're willing to learn. And when you have blacks inviting whites in with grace and whites coming in with the intent to listen and do something, that's when it happens. That's when change happens, Tom. But not until then.
Damon, how do people get connected with you?
My website is a great place to find me. You email me through my website, damonwest.org. My social media, Twitter, Instagram, @DamonWest7. My books can be found anywhere books are sold, Amazon, Barnes & Nobles, The Change Agent, The Coffee Bean, the new one that just came out a couple weeks ago, The Coffee Bean for Kids. You buy me anywhere books are sold. But yeah, that would be where you find me.
I'll put links to all that in the show notes so people can just make one click and get to wherever they want to go. Last question before I let you go. And this one is probably one that really intrigued me doing some research on your life is you were able to go back and speak to the inmates at Stiles Prison. How did that happen? Because they normally don't allow that inmates to come back and talk.
Yeah, they normally don't want you coming back to your own prison because, well, not within a certain amount of time passing, because here's the deal. If anybody had a beef with you, if anybody wanted to hurt you, and they've got that, they're going to do that. I mean, they're going to still get you. And look, there was probably guys there at the time that want, and I know there were guys there at the time, but it was important for me to go back. I told those guys when I left prison, I'll be back, And within 1 year, I got to go back. The state senator named John Whitmire, who I brought with me to when I spoke to the Alabama football team in 2017, John Whitmire helped me get back in to the Texas prison system and get back into my prison. And Tommy, the impact, I mean, you talk about bringing hope to the hopeless, brother. I mean, look, my life, the stuff we talked about, some of the stuff going on in my life, there's a movie side to all this, there's books, there's all this other stuff, there's speaking. The best thing I get to do in life is go into prisons all over America and share my story with inmates and smuggle hope to the hopeless, man. Because, people want to smuggle things into prison all the time. Dope, cell phones, knives. They're smuggling the wrong stuff, man. The stuff to smuggle into that place is hope. And I get to be a smuggler of hope today. And it started with that 1 year anniversary visit back to my old prison. And the coolest thing to hear from those guys is like, man, you kept your word, Wes. You said you'd be back and you came back. that means something in there. And I want to be that guy that always follows through on stuff.
Today's show has been sponsored by Reflection Bay Golf Club, located in the heart of beautiful Lake Las Vegas. Go to reflectionbaygolf.com. That's reflectionbaygolf.com. It's a top 100 course the public can play. It's a Jack Nicklaus Prestige signature design that played host to the Wendy's 3-Tour Challenge from 1998 to 2007. Next time you come to Vegas, you want to play some golf, let me know. I'll take you out in the course. We'll go out and play.
Absolutely. I'm down for that for sure. I love golf.
Yeah, and you were at Lake Las Vegas for the New Mexico thing, so you know right, pretty much where it's at too. Damon, thanks for taking time and telling your story. We could talk for another hour, man, and rap about this, but hopefully our listeners got the message. Yeah,
Tommy, I appreciate the opportunity to use your significant platform to do something like this, because that's the way that we get conversations started in this country, and we need to have some of these conversations, Tommy. It's incumbent upon us to do that.
Agree. For show notes, go to beforethelightspod.com. Click on the episode page and you can get all the links there. Follow us on Instagram at Before the Lights Podcast. If you would, head over to Apple Podcasts, rate and review the show. 5 stars, nice comments are always appreciated. Thank you for listening to Before the Lights. I'm Tommy Canale. And until next time, everyone, a salute, a chin chin.